Stand by. We're going live. We're going live. 10, 9, going live. 7, 6, 5, going live. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hi everyone, welcome to 10 Seconds to Air. I'm Alita Guillen. Calorie counting, sugar intake, gluten-free, intermittent fasting. We are obsessed with finding the right way to nourish ourselves and look our best. What if all these messages are actually what's in the way of having a healthy relationship with food and having that positive body image? Well, my guest today is Oona Hanson. Oona is a parent coach who works with families on how to have a healthy relationship about their bodies and the foods that nourish them. She is the founder of Parenting Without Diet Culture, a framework she designed to support families navigating this complex world of food and body. She is the creator of Common Sense Camp, a program to help kids develop essential life skills. She also works as a family mentor at Equip, an eating disorder treatment program. Oona holds a master's degree in educational psychology and a master's degree in English. Have an open mind, folks, because you may hear some framework that challenges the way you think. Here now is Oona Hanson. Oona, thank you for taking the time out of your day today.
Happy to be here.
Appreciate it. I know you are very busy. You've been meeting with a lot of families to talk about all this stuff. It is certainly a hot topic. Let's start off with what goes through your mind moments before you have a big event, a workshop, or maybe talking to some of these families.
Yeah, I really think about how families are coming to this with a lot of fear and anxiety. And so I'm trying to think of ways to kind of bring down the emotional temperature in the room and help people feel safe and relaxed. And so trying to relax myself before I start a presentation, I think usually helps everyone.
What does that feel like for you?
I mean, it's such a cliche, but taking a good deep breath and just remembering that people are coming in with a lot of deeply, deeply held beliefs, many of which I used to hold as well.
Yeah.
So really having that empathy and compassion for the people who are coming to learn some new ideas, and it might be a little scary for them. So the way that I can just kind of set the tone of this is a safe place to ask questions and a safe place to learn.
Okay, this is a safe place to ask questions, right? No judgment here, because I'm going to ask some ridiculous questions. Hopefully, the first one is not too ridiculous. How did you get to this? Because your background was actually as an English teacher, right?
Right. So I taught high school English and I coached field hockey, and I love working with adolescents. And it was really clear to me that their parents needed a lot of support.
The parents were the problem? Is that what you're trying to, is that a politically correct way of saying? Okay.
The parents needed support. These parents were under so much pressure to try to do everything the right way, in quotation marks. And, when your kids are little, there's often a lot of support. There are so many books, what to know week by week, month by month. You have parent and me classes. You have parent education for the toddler years, introducing solid foods. There's just so much support. And then once your kids are in puberty and going through adolescence, it's as if you're on your own and you're supposed to know everything. And I think parents really feel lonely and isolated during those years because you're not maybe mingling at drop-off the way you did in elementary school. So there's that disconnection and also just that sense of not always knowing what to do and just needing a little guidance. So realizing that, I love working with teenagers, and I realize their parents need help. And when you help parents, you help kids. So that's how I started doing parent education. And then, when things happened in my own life, that led me to understand the risks of the way our culture talks about food and bodies, that really became more of the focus of my work with families.
So you had your own events in your life that led to turning some of your work to food, really, and body image.
Exactly. Yeah. I had a child develop an eating disorder that, took us out at the knees, and we didn't see it coming. It was there right under our nose. We didn't realize what was happening. I thought I knew a lot about adolescence, adolescent development. I even thought I knew a lot about body image and eating disorders because of my background in working with teenagers and educational psychology background. And even I missed it. And that was really a wake-up call for me. Once my child was on the path to healing, I realized I need to help other parents learn an easier way than the way I learned. So I learned the hard way.
Yeah. And so you really understand that because we think we're doing what's right. Where do you see that we miss it? Where do we fall short?
I think it really comes down to the pressure in our culture to try to do everything perfectly as a parent. And there's this myth that there's sort of a one size fits all approach to parenting, which, I mean, there are very few things. I think there's probably certain basic safety things we could all agree on, like, I don't know, seat belts and watching kids when they're in a pool.
Yeah.
But kind of outside of those like immediate health and safety risks, it's really your mileage may vary kind of situation. But parents are under a lot of pressure to focus on helping their kids be as healthy as possible, which is an awesome goal. Like, of course, we want our kids to be as healthy as they can be. And unfortunately, the way that health gets taught to parents when it comes to food and exercise, it actually can backfire and really lead kids down an unhealthy path. And again, parents had the best of intentions. So that's really, I think, where that education piece comes in, of kind of zooming out and taking a little bit different perspective on what healthy eating really means.
So where do you start?
Well, usually when parents come to me, they're already worried about something. It may not be a full threshold eating disorder, but more often than not, kids are sicker than their parents realize. So by the time a parent is worried, things are usually pretty far along, and I can really help them, get access to treatment and get that process going. But for a lot of parents, I think they come to me because they struggled with food and body growing up, and they want to try to kind of interrupt that cycle for their kids. So I really try to get a sense of what are the parents' beliefs about food, and also what are their values around their kid, like what's really important to them for their kids. And usually when you kind of have those two categories, we can find a kind of a middle ground and a common set of values that can help them make some subtle adjustments that can make a really big difference.
Right. Well, I think that is so key when you start with the parents, because blame it on us. We're the ones that are screwing it up, right? But it's so true because we have our background and our beliefs on food. And I think you and I talked about this before. For example, in my family, my mother went to Weight Watchers when it first started. And I, as a little kid, tagged along with her and sat through those meetings when she would go in and get weighed. And I lost a pound and cheer. And then they would sit in a circle and these women would talk about how, in my mom's case, they'd complain about what happened in their life that week, and it was really tough. And so I ate this and I made a mistake. And there was all this guilt and all this emotion around food just to lose that pound for the week. So of course I come into my parenting with that being my background, and I'm thinking, Weight Watchers had this much cottage cheese and this much cantaloupe, and that, that's good. That's healthy. The little, what were those cookies called?
Snackwells.
Snackwells. That's exactly it. Snackwells. You could eat, hundreds of them and they had nothing in them, or maybe you're only supposed to eat 2, but you thought that they were so good for you, in quotes, that you would overeat them.
Right.
That's my problem.
That was the era of fat-free, right?
Yes.
So the idea was, if it was fat-free, you could just go to town, and of course you would eat the whole bag of Snackwells and not really be satisfied because there was no fat.
Yeah, that's right. And then you'd really want a good solid Oreo cookie from Nabisco, or is that who even makes them? I don't know. So you start with the parents. So we really need to look at ourselves, and what questions should we be asking ourselves?
Yeah, I want to back up for 1 second and make it really clear that I have so much compassion for parents, and this is not about blaming parents. Every parent is doing the best they can, and often, really trying to actively protect their kids from some of these issues.
Right.
So there's no judgment on my end at all.
Right.
And I really, if there's any blame to be had, or I would only place the blame on the larger diet culture.
Yeah.
Right. Which is sending our kids these messages at the doctor's office, at preschool, at church.
What do you mean at the doctor's office?
kids getting messages about the foods they should eat or shouldn't eat, or
You mean at your doctor's appointment when the doctor says, how, are you eating fruits and vegetables, that kind of thing?
right, and comments about their weight or their BMI, or comments about their exercise, often without even asking kids, what do you like to do and things like that. So kids are getting these messages from the whole culture. So even if you as a family don't, demonize foods or criticize people's bodies, our kids are still going to get some of those messages from the culture.
For sure. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where do we start?
I think we start with re-examining that word healthy.
Okay.
Right. So we've been taught to put foods into categories of healthy and unhealthy. Right. And kids, again, they get this in assignments. I've seen many a kindergarten assignment of like circle the healthy food and put an X to the unhealthy food.
Right.
And so this might blow your mind a little, but I feel really strongly that there's no such thing as a healthy or unhealthy food.
That does blow my mind.
Right. Because every food has a context. And, I'll give an example. So would you put apple in the healthy or unhealthy food category?
Healthy.
Right. It's like the apple a day keeps the doctor away,
Yeah,
right? It's like the poster child of healthy eating, right? Well, not anymore, because now there's too much sugar and fruit, so-called, right?
Yeah.
So now
I'm completely confused,
right.
but it used to be in my healthy category. Now I'm
Right.
confused.
Right.
Now it's in the, oh my God, I have so much sugar, but if it's a green apple, it has less sugar. So that I'm confused.
Right. I mean, these rules are always changing, and they're contradictory. But I think an apple is sort of like, everyone can picture an apple. And I think most kids on an assignment would put that in the healthy food category. But let's imagine your child only ate apples for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They would probably be pretty sick to their stomach. They might be physically full, but not satisfied and not nourished. They would potentially develop, really disordered eating. If that's really all they were eating, that would be a serious problem.
Yeah.
Right. And so the food itself, whether we want to categorize as it healthy or not, it really comes down to the relationship with the food or the behavior around that food.
Yeah.
On the flip side, if your child has learned that ice cream is this sort of naughty treat, or that ice cream is unhealthy, and you think about, the ice cream truck comes down the street and all the kids in the neighborhood run out to get something on a hot summer day, and your child is so anxious about that and feels like, I can't have that, and or maybe they do have it and then they're just filled with guilt and fear that they're going to hurt their body. That's not healthy for them either.
Right.
So it's really about the behaviors around the food or the relationship with the food. And what's funny, when we categorize foods as healthy or unhealthy, that's actually what makes it harder to have a healthy relationship with all foods.
Yeah, I get that now. I get that. Okay. So how do we rewire that to say, what's the criteria? What should I be thinking in my head to take that word healthy out? I think you mentioned variety at one time. What should I be thinking?
Well, I think if our kids ask, is something healthy? I think we want to ask them, what do they think that means? Right? Because you want to unpack that a little. They might have just heard something at school or from a friend, right?
Yeah.
So it's always good to come with sort of curiosity when our kids bring in some of these labels. I think for us as parents, it's really helpful to kind of get rid of the labels, right? The categorization. Certainly if your family, if there's someone with an allergy or celiac, and there's a reason to categorize certain foods, or you keep kosher, or you have some other kind of restriction around food that isn't about diet culture at all, that's totally different. But for the for the rest of the other families that have just they're living in regular diet culture, I think just calling a food by what it is really helpful. So not labeling foods as like carbs or protein, right?
Yeah.
And instead, as you said, that idea of variety really helps us get our kids access to a lot of different kinds of foods. So if we're thinking about not having maybe like the perfectly balanced plate, like I think those words perfect and balanced can go sideways really fast.
Perfectly balanced, healthy dinner. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. I mean, that's like all my red flags go up because it's so much pressure, right?
Yeah.
And so instead, if we think about, offering our kids a variety of foods, we model eating and enjoying a variety of foods. No foods are off limits. No foods are so, scary that they're, I think what happens to a lot of kids is, they're told that like, oh, red number whatever, or that blue dye in that cupcake is going to like poison you. I mean, I've heard this at birthday parties, and it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Now, if a child has an actual allergy to something, that's different. But
Right.
the comments I'm hearing at birthday parties are not about allergies. It's about these beliefs that people have, been taught to be, made them fearful of food. There's nothing, again, barring an allergy or celiac, there's nothing in a food that could harm your child more than a fear of food.
Yeah. Right. Because we end up creating all this, and then they become teenagers, and it can go the other way. Right? They could think the healthy is all they eat, and now they're really down a different road.
Right. So it can lead to a lot of restriction, right?
Yeah.
Kids,
Because you can think somebody's eating healthy. You can think, oh, they eat so healthy. Oh, all they eat is salad or vegetables. Oh, they love, but that's unhealthy too.
Right. I think for parents of teens and tweens, if your child is eating mostly salads and vegetables, that's a huge red flag, right? So again, in our culture, that would be praised, but that could be really dangerous for a growing kid, and really for an adult too. If someone is, that friend that you think of as being so disciplined or having so much willpower or always choosing certain kinds of foods.
She looks so good.
Yeah, I would caution against complimenting someone on that kind of behavior, and it might be worth in a private conversation saying, "Hey, I've noticed, you have maybe a really strict or rigid way of eating. Like, I want to check in with you." Right. So I think rather than assuming things are positive and worthy of praise, we might actually take a different approach at how we see some of these things.
Isn't that called orthorexia?
Right. So orthorexia
what is that?
Is the unhealthy obsession with healthy or clean eating. And again, I'm putting healthy and clean in quotation marks.
Right.
And that can very quickly evolve into anorexia. The overlap is considerable, but really a kid can learn about so-called healthy eating at school or from a family member and go on this health kick. And at first it seems like a great idea. And so quickly a child can get really stuck in a rigid way of thinking about food. They can get into energy deficit where they're not getting enough nutrition. And that can kick off a full threshold eating disorder really quickly.
So as adults, though, we've obviously been trained and we've been brought up thinking certain things about healthy, not healthy. How can we check ourselves before we open our mouths to offer something to our kids? What's your suggestion there of what our process is for ourselves and when we offer something to our families or when we make dinner?
I really think it's important to focus on food being delicious and making dinner time a pleasant experience as much as possible, right? Depending on if you have really little kids, dinner can be total chaos.
Yeah.
So lower the expectations. It's not going to be like this Norman Rockwell painting every night. But
okay, good. I feel much better. Thank you, Oona.
But I think making foods, enjoyable, as delicious as you can make them, having some level of variety and making meal times relaxed where you're not coming in with expectations that everyone has to eat a certain amount or a certain way or in a certain order, that trying to come in with a little bit more relaxed approach. If you're making a really big shift in your family, if you're deciding, I really do want to rethink the way I talk about food, especially if you have teens and tweens, I think it's great to, have a family meeting or maybe just while you're walking the dog or you're in the car, say, I'm really learning about diet culture and I want to do things differently. I'm going to try to use some different language from time to time, and I'm probably going to make mistakes. I'm going to mess up. I would love your help. If you guys catch me saying, oh, that's like a treat, we have to save that for after, blah, blah, teenagers love to catch us making mistakes, right? So this can be a great family connecting experience where you're modeling that, hey, you're learning and growing and making mistakes, and they can be part of this conversation. It doesn't have to be this like secret thing happening behind closed doors. I would put it out in the open and say, hey, let's talk about the way we've been talking about food, and I would like to do it differently. What do you guys think?
And what's the ultimate goal?
The ultimate goal is for kids to know how to nourish themselves without guilt, fear, without it having any sense of morality. Like they don't feel like they're a good person or a bad person based on how they're eating. I mean, if you're stealing food from a hungry person, okay, there's morality there.
Right, right.
But other than that, food is morally neutral, and it should be one of the joys of life, and not something that's fraught with all of this, negative energy or even positive energy, in the sense of, if certain foods are held on a pedestal and like they're this special forbidden fruit, they sort of glitter in a different way, especially for kids, that can lead to fixation and binging and secret eating and just really disordered relationships with food, when food should be such a pleasure in our lives.
Yeah. So I want to ask, though, is it bad if you are having a bad day and you say, I just want to go home and eat a bag of chips or ice cream, or maybe it's carrots? I don't know what it is, but that is emotion, right? That has emotion in it. Should we never do that?
I think emotional eating is one of those terms that's been demonized in our culture.
Yeah.
We are hardwired to have emotion around food, right? If you think about a newborn baby being fed by its parent, right? This is the bonding and connection and love. Like, that's how it gets expressed, right? Babies are soothed by nursing or drinking from a bottle, right? So we are hardwired to take comfort from food. If we didn't take comfort and pleasure from food, we wouldn't probably get enough calories to survive. We wouldn't be sitting in this room today, right? Our ancestors wouldn't have made it if food was some complicated, unpleasant experience.
Yeah.
So I think comfort eating, and so I don't like calling it stress eating. I think that was, I understand why people do call it that. I think of it as comfort eating. Like, oh, I'm actually like, this is a way I can comfort myself, and there's nothing wrong with it. Mm-hmm. I think we want to have an array of tools to use to comfort ourselves, but there's nothing wrong with food being one of those. And for kids, it is often the most accessible way to comfort themselves. And it only becomes a problem when we demonize it and make it something to feel ashamed of or guilty about, because that's what sets you on that spiral or that cycle of a disordered relationship with food.
It seems so simple when you say it, but then I think of the pictures that I see on Instagram when the kids are in high school and they see so-and-so on the boat with the little bikini on. And I mean, some of these pictures I see and I say, that person doesn't eat. There's no way that they eat anything. So in theory, it sounds like it makes sense, but how does it really work if the kids have all this input? And, you're one person kind of saying one thing here that completely makes sense. And you talking relaxes me. I think, oh, you know what? I'm not going to feel bad about that piece of cheesecake that I want tonight. I'm going to enjoy that. And it doesn't mean I have it all the time. And I probably feel that guilt because when I was little, it was a treat. And so now I think it's, special, whatever. I get all that now. But there's a lot more input. There's other things that are coming at them, that are coming at all of us. How do you balance that when you work with these families?
Yeah, for teenagers and body image, it is really complicated. We had, our peer group, and maybe we had 17 magazine, right? But now kids have 24/7 TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, and and even streaming like Netflix and things like that.
Yeah.
We think about the bodies that we tend to see in media. The majority of bodies we see look like about 1% of the population in real life, right? Mm-hmm. So we have a very skewed sense of what natural human body diversity actually is. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times people say, "What haven't people gained so much weight, and haven't our as a population haven't we modern life has ruined there's a lot of kind of fear mongering about what's happened to people." And I always say, go spend some time in an art museum, right?
Yeah.
Human beings have always come in a wide range of shapes and sizes.
Right.
And it's only recently that we've decided, oh no, only this very narrow range of body type is seen as healthy and attractive.
Right.
And that's not good for any of us.
Right.
So it's really a lot of conversations with our teenagers. I think it's normal for adolescents to have some self-consciousness or awareness of their bodies. That predates Instagram. Mm-hmm. That's just a time when you are more aware of how you look to other people. It's part of growing up. And I think for our relationship with our teenagers, we really want to stay connected to them on an emotional level. So if they express concern about their body, I think our default is often to rush in with reassurance and say, "Oh, but you're so beautiful, or you're so handsome."
Right.
For all the parents who've already done this, that's
Yeah.
okay. This is, I think,
Okay.
our default response. And I think there's another way we can go about it. So if our kid expresses body image distress, try to take a deep breath and lean into it and say, "That sounds really uncomfortable. Like, tell me more. What's going on, or did somebody say something, or I want to hear what this is like for you." And we're not going to rush in to reassure or correct, because when we rush in, we're kind of telling them, "I'm not comfortable having this conversation with you." Maybe we aren't. Right? And so this is where you can go back the next day or the next week and say, when you asked me about, that thing about, getting the dress for prom or wearing the swimsuit to the party, I don't think I gave you a great answer. I want to hear about that again. And so when we're in that moment, trying to stay connected on an emotional level, who they are as a person, rather than keeping the focus on appearance, that can go a long way. But this is complicated. There's no quick fix for adolescent body image angst. It's an ongoing conversation.
Yeah, and food, all of this is complicated also because we all come at it from different places, and there are health issues, and I'm sure there are, people listening, and when I hear you talk, sometimes I think, well, what about, we're talking about people who maybe don't get enough food, but there's also people who are on the other extreme of that maybe are getting too much. And the concern would be, well, if I say nothing about healthy, unhealthy, now I'm worried about my kid having maybe an unhealthy weight problem that leads to other health issues. So that concerns me. When I hear you talk, I'm worried that if I'm gloves off completely and I say nothing, what do you say to that?
Well, it makes sense to think that we could create another problem by having this more relaxed approach around food, and the data just doesn't support that. So
okay, Alita, you're saying so. That's very nice. So that's a nice try, Alita, but that's not how it works.
I think this is a very common fear. If you think about, in the last, especially the last 30 years, there's been this pressure to try to control kids' weight and to give kids and families rules about food. This has not solved any of the supposed problems it was trying to solve. It's made those problems worse, right? In terms of, people feeling like they have an even more fraught relationship with food. And it's increasing rates of eating disorders, right? So it's not solving the problems it set out to solve, and it's creating new problems. So I really think we know that what we've been doing hasn't been working. And we know that restricting someone's food intake, it's just not going to end well, right? Yeah. They're either going to end up on a restricting path, or it's going to drive someone toward binge eating, right? So that's the natural human response, right, to restriction, is to binge. So when somebody's binging, and they think, "Oh, I have to stop binge eating," really what they have to do is stop restricting. Right. They're restricting either earlier in their day or maybe earlier in their life, or they have a lot of mental restriction, like they do eat the food, but they beat themselves up for it. Right. So, really in terms of fostering health for kids, helping kids feel safe in their bodies and having access to a variety of foods, that's what we need to focus on.
Is the hope that they will baseline in some sort of healthy place? I'm guessing that's what we hope for. But my question is, where will they baseline? They hopefully won't have an eating disorder because we didn't create that, but where will they land? I mean,
the ideal in my mind is that we help kids hang on to the intuitive eating that they're born with. So most of us are born intuitive eaters, right? We know when we're hungry, we know when we're full, we know when we need to eat for comfort or for celebration. We know what our preferences are, and diet culture comes in and interrupts that. And sometimes medical issues interrupt that too. Kids can have problems with feeding early in childhood, or can develop, other problems during the lifespan. But all of us can get back to that intuitive eating. It just takes a lot of work.
What are the real tangible things that we can do to get to intuitive eating and take these words out of our parenting, repertoire, because it's causing problems?
Yeah, well, for any of your listeners who like to read books, I always have to recommend this one book first, and it's called How to Raise an Intuitive Eater
Okay.
by Amy Severson and Sumner Brooks.
Okay, I'll put that in the show notes.
Yeah, so that is a fantastic guide for exactly how to do the thing that you're asking about.
Okay.
And it takes a whole book to kind of explain
Okay,
it in
okay.
the depth that most families will need. In the meantime, I think parents can take stock of their own history around food, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
Right? Kind of get really clear on like what are the beliefs that I brought into my adulthood from my own childhood.
Yeah. Ooh,
then-
that's painful.
It can be really painful, and a lot of us can have anger at our parents or grandparents or whoever raised us. And so I think it's helpful to know that they were doing the best they could too.
Okay. So take stock of our own upbringing and what our thoughts are around food from the family that we were raised in.
Right. And then get really clear on what's most important to you about your kids. Is it how they look? Is it how people think you parent because they, the way their beautiful rainbow bento box lunches at school, right? That might be really important to you, and that's probably worth thinking about.
Okay.
Do you want your kids to feel good in their body no matter what their body looks like? And then it's a lot of modeling, right? So if we're someone who's always dieting or exercising always with the goal of trying to change something about our body, we don't ever put on the bathing suit in the summer, those kinds of things. I think when parents can start to make those little changes, like maybe get out of your comfort zone. Maybe you do wear shorts this summer. Maybe you take the cover up off at the pool this summer with your kids. Maybe you skip that, intense workout class because you really don't feel like going that day and you don't beat yourself up over it. So I think looking at the ways you can model being relaxed around your body and around food. And then when it comes to the actual grocery shopping, include your kids. Find out what they want to try.
That's a great idea. We do so much for them, and they really don't partake in anything. We give them more time to get on social media because we do so much.
Yeah. So I think really including them, teaching kids how to cook, like that's the best nutrition education you can give a kid.
Okay.
We think about it when they're off on their own.
Yeah.
Right?
Love that. Yeah.
Yes, they can hit a button on an app and dinner can arrive, right? And that's great. Like fed is best from infancy to the very end.
Yeah.
Fed is best. And I think we all want our kids to have that experience of, knowing how to make a meal for themselves and the people they care about. So I would really focus on those things. And then just being aware of the words that you're using around food. Again, trying not to judge yourself like, oh no, I messed up. But just saying, wow, I really do put foods in categories a lot. And just kind of taking stock of where you are. And then sharing with your family that you want to start to make some changes and get their input.
Okay, great stuff to think about. Thank you so much, Oona. I'll have all your information in the show notes, so if anyone wants to get in touch with you, follow you, pick up that book that you mentioned, I'll put all of that in there.
Awesome.
Thank you.